What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, November 20th, start of a brand new week, start of Thanksgiving week here, and everybody's getting ready for the Thanksgiving dinner and getting the cooking and the baking here. I don't know what the turkeys have to be thankful for, of course. Well, vegetarians, I would imagine, here. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Now, the situation with Judge Roy Moore is really starting to heat on up because more and more focus is being brought to Beverly Young Nelson, who's represented by feminist lawyer Gloria Allred. And supposedly the issue over this forged entry in the yearbook. And Gloria Allred is out there. She's still trying to support the story, but she's being very careful. She will not commit and say it's not a forgery or it is a forgery. She's trying to basically talk around it, say, how could anybody doubt that it's Roy Moore's yearbook signature? And, of course, the media is starting to come on back and say, did Gloria Allred actually ask Beverly Nelson if she saw Roy Moore sign the yearbook? And Allred came on back and said, well, I don't believe at the time she had a clue whether he was an assistant DA or a DA, but he signed it, she took it. And there's no reason for anybody to think it's anything but his signature here. And they keep pushing her. Did she see him sign it? Now, remember, it's come on out that the DA following the signature does not stand for district attorney. It stands for Judge Moore's assistant when he was sitting on Beverly Young Nelson's divorce case. And that was just pro forma on the court papers that he would judge Roy Moore, and then his assistant would initial it. But the handwriting doesn't match between the first section, which simply ends saying Roy, and the second section, which, by the way, is in a slightly different colored ink. And so, yes, at this point, it is a forgery, and Gloria Allred is out there still trying to support the story and keep the lawsuit moving forward and do the hatchet number on Judge Roy Moore. And we're seeing more and more people saying it's time to charge Gloria Allred for presenting this forged document as being genuine, and that includes the accuser's stepson, who's saying this is all complete nonsense. And as the old accusers fall by the wayside, the political machine that's trying to get rid of Judge Moore just cranks out new ones, and one of their latest is Gloria Deason, who says she went on a few dates with Roy Moore, but nothing happened beyond some kisses and hugging. But according to her lawyer, Paula Cobia, well, that's abuse right there. That's abuse. That just simply taking an 18-year-old out for a date is abuse. Now, I don't know what state that was in, but I think in most states, 18 is considered age of consent. So it's not really abuse. And again, the woman is saying nothing happened but some hugs and kisses. But they're out there just trying to pound on him, and so far, it is not working all that well. The latest poll down in Alabama has Moore leading the Democrat, Jones, 49% to 43%. Now, he's lost a little bit of his lead, but interestingly enough, 36% of all likely voters said they intend to vote for Jones anyway despite the allegations, and 35% said the allegations made them more likely to vote for Moore. So everybody is realizing this is just a political hatchet job. And their sympathies are with the victim there. All right, let's take ourselves a phone call. Brian in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Brian, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you just fine. You're on the air. What is it you want to talk about?
Yes, I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm looking into some corporate malfeasance by one of the big fast food chains in the United States.
Okay.
And I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI asking for any documents they might have on this fast food chain. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what the fast food chain
I think it would probably be better if you did not.
Okay. Well, the FBI got back to me and said that they don't have any documents on this fast food chain. I find it very hard to believe but I know that you're more of an expert in this field than I am. I was wondering if you could tell me if I could trust the FBI, and if I can't trust the FBI to tell me the truth about this, is there any alternative method for tracking down government documents about corporate malfeasance from the fast food chain?
First of all, you can't trust the FBI. That's a given. But it all depends on what you think is going on, because the FBI would be involved only in the case of a criminal investigation of some kind. If it's something else that's going on, there may be, you might want to be talking to like a Better Business Bureau or people like that and just see if there have been complaints. If it's an issue over the food quality, then you're talking about FDA and USDA. But again, corporations are unfortunately protected by our system in this country.
I see. Well, there are a couple of issues going on here. The main crime, as I see it, and I don't know if this is a crime in and of itself, but I feel like this fast food chain introduced a menu item that was basically a slam dunk, something that everybody in the world would want.
Yes.
And it mysteriously disappeared several years ago. I believe under suspicious circumstances, although I can't prove anything. Although in the course of my research, I did uncover a very suspicious murder in a town, which was the last town where the restaurant. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out a way to talk around the name of the company.
Okay, well let me cut in here a little bit, because restaurants will add and delete items from the menu based on how well they're doing, and also the supply chain. You've probably heard that over at McDonald's, the McRib is back. Well, they bring it back any time that they have got a source for pork that's cost, effective for them to put into the buns. The same thing with Subway. They brought their Reuben back. And very often the menus are dictated not just by customer preference, but by the ability to acquire the raw materials for the meal at a suitable price. So that they can sell it at a price the customers are comfortable paying and still maintain a profitable markup. So I think what you need to be doing right now, though, is rather than talking to a talk radio host, is that you maybe need to consult with a lawyer or some other form of investigator and put your skulls together on this one, because I really don't have anything more to help in this question, other than to say that, as a matter of fact, the FBI cannot be trusted. But unless it was a criminal investigation, unless it crossed state lines, the FBI would not really be involved anyway. Merely removing an item from a menu is hardly a criminal offense. Anyway, Brian, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, get on back here to the news, after we do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, this whole thing about sexual allegations against Judge Roy Moore has backflashed, and in tandem with Harvey Weinstein's outing, all of a sudden there's a firestorm of sexual allegations that are going on out there. Some of them are real, some of them are probably just hyped up to garner 15 minutes of fame. We know that somebody claiming to be from the Washington Post was literally out there trolling young women in Alabama with robocalls, offering a cash reward for anybody who would come forward and make yet another accusation against Judge Roy Moore. But it's backflashing now, and of course, inevitably, it gets back to Bill Clinton. And now, all of a sudden, 4 new alleged victims of Bill Clinton have come forward. And apparently this goes back to a time when the president was working with this billionaire playboy and flying on his private jet nicknamed Air blank one. You can put in the word yourself. But they're all filing lawsuits against the 71-year-old former president. And attorneys are saying that they've notified Clinton. And now all of a sudden we're seeing the Democrats who are trying to salvage their own skins. They're turning on Bill Clinton, and they're saying, yeah, maybe this did happen. Maybe these charges were real. And it's a way of trying to undermine critics who are saying, well, look at all the allegations that Bill Clinton had, and they were all claimed to be false, so shouldn't we assume the same for Judge Roy Moore? So they're trying to say, well, some of the ones for Clinton, yeah, they were real, and so some of the ones for Moore are possibly real as well. Here is the point. This is an organized hatchet job on Judge Roy Moore. And somebody made the decision to fake to modify, to alter that yearbook signature by adding the name Moore after somebody named Roy, and just simply copied on out, the judge's signature, apparently from the divorce documents, which is how the DA got in there. And again, it's a slightly different colored ink. Now, if you know you've got real evidence against somebody, you don't dare engage in any kind of fraud, because when the fraud is uncovered, as it has been in this case, it discredits the whole case. And that's what's happened here. Now, last Friday on Fox News' Ingraham Angle, Bill Clinton accusers Paula Jones and Juanita Broderick are saying they're skeptical about the sincerity of Democrats who've recently come out against Bill Clinton. And Paula Jones said, well, it's a little bit too late. It's been 20 years. And so it's kind of a shallow apology for them to come on out and say, well, yes, maybe these women were, in fact, wronged. Now, right now, the corporate media is just, they're conditizing us. They're focusing on all the sex allegations. There are new ones about this movie star and this director and this athlete and so forth and so on. And they're doing it because they don't want to talk about the escalating military operations around the world. And they don't want to talk about Russiagate, the Dossier Gate. They don't want to talk about Uranium Gate. They don't want to talk about Primary Gate. So they're going to use these tawdry sex scandals to titillate everybody and keep you paying attention. But we're not going to go that way. So moving on to something that is much more important. The FBI and the Department of Justice have basically stated they were unable to verify any of the allegations made inside that supposed Trump dossier. None of it was verifiable. And apparently, when Fusion GPS came back with the dossier, nobody even made an effort to verify it at the time. They just immediately ran with it. They gave a copy to John McCain, and John McCain was handing it to the FBI to kick off the investigation into Donald Trump. But the entire Donald Trump probe is based on a lie. And that's not the way it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to have verification of these allegations before you go to that FISA court and say, we need warrants. But the FBI and Department of Justice are saying they can't verify any of it. Not a bit of it. It's all a fiction. Now, as you know, this IRS Tea Party scandal is still out there in circulating around. And apparently, former IRS executive Lois Lerner told a federal court last week that members of her family, including young children, face death threats and a real risk of physical harm if her explanation of the Tea Party targeting scandal becomes public. She wants her testimony sealed permanently. She doesn't think you, the American people, are ready to hear just why the IRS was targeting Tea Party groups, conservative groups, denying them their tax-exempt status, asking for additional information that really was not relative to the case. And so Ms. Lerner and Holly Paz, her deputy, are in court saying it's all got to be kept hush-hush. Lois Lerner wants her testimony to be handled like it's a state secret. Now remember, Lois Lerner is the one whose hard drive mysteriously crashed with all the evidence on it, and there was no backup. Oh my goodness, we recycled the backup tapes here, and we just fired the company that was in charge of doing the backups. Golly gee shuckies. Now, Hillary has been on the warpath against Donald Trump over his Twitter habit and some of the things that he tweets on out there, and went on out there at one of her latest book signings bragging about how Bill Clinton never used Twitter while he was the president. Well, Hillary, Twitter didn't exist when Bill Clinton was president. So you're either senile or you're just hoping that people aren't really paying attention to what you're saying, which more and more seems to be the case here. All right, let's get on into the war zones. There's a lot going on. Down in Syria, government troops have liberated al-Bukamal from ISIS. And at this point, ISIS is pretty much wiped out in Syria. There's still some small groups going around, but all their strongholds are now back under the control of the Syrian forces. And have you noticed that this is not being reported on the corporate media? I mean, they're reporting on how the United Nations is still struggling to find some way to blame Assad for gassing those people back in April. But the fact that the U.S.-supported forces in Syria are in serious trouble, we're losing this thing. That's not being reported. And the corporate media has yet to report on those warehouses of U.S. weapons that were found in the wake of the retreating ISIS forces. Not getting a report on that, just more sex allegations. This person was caught staring lasciviously at paintings in a museum or something. Now, Saudi Arabia and Israel apparently are going to assuage their frustration with Syria by turning on Lebanon. Lebanon's going to be the next target. We didn't do very well in Syria. Let's go after Lebanon. And of course, Riyadh is accusing Hezbollah of declaring war against Saudi Arabia, and Hezbollah has done no such thing. And of course, we had that strange situation where Lebanon Prime Minister Hariri read his resignation letter in Saudi Arabia. Now, Hariri has left Saudi Arabia. He went to France. He's going down to Egypt. Interestingly enough, 2 of his children were kept behind in Saudi Arabia, ostensibly so they can complete their schooling. But it sounds to me like they're actually hostages to make sure that Hariri goes on out and says and does what his masters want him to do. Now, over the weekend, they had this meeting of the Arab League, this emergency meeting that was called by Saudi Arabia. Some of the Arab nations did not bother sending their representatives. And there was quite a bit of conversation back and forth, and it didn't go as smoothly as probably Saudi Arabia would have liked. But in the end, they did get a declaration that Hezbollah is a terrorist group. Now, the Arab League head is on record as saying Lebanon will not be a battleground for clashes between Iran and the Arab states. And he's sort of right. Lebanon is coming into play because Israel wants to invade it again. And the goal here is to somehow be able to disarm or get rid of Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has been protecting Lebanon from Israeli aggressions for many, many years. And so, no surprise, Lebanon is out there saying that it was inappropriate for the Arab League to call Hezbollah a terrorist organization. Now, Hezbollah is now out there saying that they're expecting that there will be a false flag event of some kind, possibly an assassination, that will be blamed on them, or some kind of an explosion in Israel that will be blamed on them. And yes, at this point, that's quite a likely scenario to happen. Israel wants Hezbollah gone because then Israel can invade Lebanon all the way up to the Litani River, which is what they've been lusting for these many years here. Meanwhile, back at the Arab League, one of the people there, the Speaker of the House, Nabih Berri, basically reminded everybody that there are tens of Arab League resolutions confirming Lebanon's right to resist Israel. And you don't really need a resolution. Every sovereign independent nation that is being aggressed against by a foreign nation has a right to resist and defend itself with whatever means are at hand, and that includes Hezbollah. So it's really chaotic over there. It could very easily ignite a regional war. Now, the Arab League is saying they may refer to the United Nations Security Council to counter Iran's alleged meddling. And what have they meddled in? Well, they meddled in Syria. No, they weren't meddling. They were there at the invitation of the Syrian government. So we're coming up here on a commercial break, and when we come on back, more about Syria and Iran and Lebanon, and we also have a caller waiting on the line. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones, and we're going to start with Ralph in New York. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Mike, I want to ask you a question. I ask you a hypothetical question. What would an economic meltdown would be like in an event of marriage and divorce involving child support, involving alimony, palimony? What would it be like Do you think there will be attack on men?
Well,
if that happens, what's your opinion on this?
Well, in some cases, the fathers wind up with custody and the child support goes the other way. But, if the parent that's supposed to be paying child support doesn't have money, they don't have money. And I know there are some very draconian things that are done to enforce child support payments. But again, in the event of an economic collapse, and there's no money out here, a lot of things are not going to get paid, whether it's car payments, mortgage payments, alimony payments, child support, so forth and so on. So it will be a domino effect throughout the entire society.
Yeah, because there's a movement all over the internet called MGTOW, men going their own way. Are you aware of that?
No, I haven't heard about it.
Because there's a movement all over the internet because the men going their own way. They don't believe in having relationships no more. They are tired and fed up of the laws based on men. It's not fair. It's not fair the way men are being treated in the courts, involving child support, involving the lies a lot of the feminists do against men. And there's a huge movement on the internet. I was wondering if you're aware about that.
No, I wasn't, but I'm aware.
Economic meltdown that women with these high, and also with women these high profile jobs, they are doomed and gloom because the entire economy is going to go into automation. A lot of the women have a lot of these automation jobs and careers.
Well, I do remember back in the 1990s when I'd gone through my own divorce, my breakup from my first marriage, and to give you an example of the idiocy of the laws, and this was all coming out of the militant feminist movement. Where the men were always to blame, the women were always presumed to be the sane, and it did result in a very weirdly biased system, biased against men, and so I did get involved in the then growing men's rights movement. But to show you just how silly it got, my first wife succeeded in dumping all of her credit card bills on me under the excuse that the mental abuse that I had put her under led to her shopping addiction, or some such nonsense as that. And so it is out of control.
This was back in the 1960s during the Gloria Steinem days, right? She's the main culprit that destroyed basically men and created feminism, right?
Yeah, I understand that she was linked to the CIA at one point. And again, back in the 60s, they were playing divide and conquer games, men against women, blacks against white, young against old, to keep the American people from uniting in opposition to the war in Vietnam. But I don't know about this current movement, men going their own way, because right now I'm in a very happy marriage. And so I'm not going. I'm not going my own way.
Just type in MGTOW. MGTOW is very real. I mean, it's you can blame the Nixon administration and the Johnson administration for creating the welfare system to divide and conquer mostly minority families throughout the United States. Even in that era when they came in the 60s, you cannot have a man in your household. The woman can only live there and a child, and the man has to get thrown out.
Well, the one thing that was very obvious again during the militant feminist craze of the 1990s. Was that women were being told not that they had a choice to have a career, but that they should want one. And women who wanted to stay home and be housewives and mothers were denigrated and insulted. And what it resulted in was all these women entering the workforce, which increased tax revenues to the government. And these dual parents, were spending so much on child care that it really didn't pencil out for them. But by the time they realized how they'd been trapped, they couldn't go back to the system that they had before. And this also, of course, meant that with both parents absent from the child's life, the upbringing of the child fell to corporate media propaganda and what they were getting from the media stars. Anyway, listen, we got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you.
We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and let's go ahead and grab some more phone calls. Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
I guess you may have read that Charles Manson has finally stopped being a parasite on the taxpayer's expense.
Yes.
Because he's now deceased. You know who put him in jail?
Oh, Vincent.
Bugliosi.
Yeah.
You know that, this is something I've been thinking about calling into various neocon radio shows and seeing if I can get the name Vince Bugliosi out there. And then they say, yeah, well, Vince, he gathered information about this unprosecuted, mass murder many, many times worse than Charles Manson. And go, yeah, really? Yeah, go onto YouTube and put in Vince Bugliosi. And they go, oh, yeah, we got to check this out. And then they find out that the mass murderer is George W. Bush, the grandson of the man who continued to fund Hitler even after America and Germany were at war.
Well, the reason the Charles Manson case attracted the public's attention was, first of all, the murder of actress Sharon Tate, who was very famous at the time, and she was pregnant when she was killed. That was very shocking. The fact that these killings were completely random added to the terror factor. I mean, it was tailor-made for the news media to just go to town on this, and a lot of people's lives were indirectly affected by a lot of this. When I was in college at the time, and one of my very best friends in the theater department there, and he was studying to be a director. His day job when he wasn't in school was he managed one of the supermarkets owned by the LaBianca family, which was the other family that was killed by Manson's girls. And so he was living under police protection for a while they were trying to figure out whether this was, something that was going to spread. And you remember? Do you remember a science fiction writer by the name of David Gerald? He wrote a very popular Star Trek episode called "The Trouble with Tribbles," and
okay, I remember that one. I don't remember him.
His was a very interesting story, and his life was touched by this because you remember that when the Manson's girls arrived at Sharon Tate's home, they found a young man in the car in the driveway, and they killed him. And that young man in the car in the driveway was David Gerald's partner. And so, it was like a lot of us in Los Angeles, it was like only 1 or 2 degrees away from separation. And before they went on the whole killing spree, a lot of Manson's girls would hang out at the Renaissance Pleasure Fair. And so it was like a really kind of a scary thing. These were people who were just right there and, seemed to be part of that hippie counterculture thing. But it was, again, the shock of it all. It was tailor-made for the media. And, of course, Bugliosi came out with his book, and they've made all kinds of movies about it. And so, I'm glad Manson got locked up for life. And I think the only reason he didn't get the death penalty was that he personally did not take part in any of the killings. He just succeeded in brainwashing his girls to go on out and do the evil deeds for him. And that was something else that gave it a lot of sizzle in the public mind, that he had this kind of control over his girls, where he could literally order them to go on out and kill.
But do you see the viability of calling into talk shows that normally don't want to deal with anything that shows that their side of the left-right paradigm is just as, it's like, look, I'm not giving Hillary a pass. Why are you people giving your own a pass?
Well, here's a key point. Here's a key point. In theory, I understand what you're trying to say. In theory, the presidents are operating under the letter of the law, and obviously Charles Manson and the girls were not, and I think that's an important difference to keep in mind. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go. The phone lines are loading on up here, so thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Those who make the law can break the law. Throughout history, that's what it shows. Hey, Mike, that thing that happened at the NATO drill with Turkey,
yes,
and Norway, do you think that could have been somebody did that on purpose to make Turkey get out of NATO? You know what I mean? Like, because there's just too many instances going on where they're pushing. I mean, I know they could be making a lot of mistakes, but there just seems maybe somebody in Europe, either elements in France or Germany, want Turkey out of NATO to cause a wedge with the U.S. So, because Turkey's a very important partner, Mike. Like that, can stop a world war. Like whoever Turkey with, I believe. But
Turkey's relationship with NATO has always been tenuous, and Turkey has been showing signs of pivoting away from Europe and the U.S. and pivoting more toward Russia, China. So it may be that the simulation map for the war games was based on assessments of what the world is going to be like in so many years down the road. And obviously Erdogan was very upset about that, and it may result in Turkey breaking with NATO. And again, it was kind of a foolish thing for them to do, but again, I think military planners are probably realizing that Turkey cannot be relied on in the event of a major war between NATO and Russia and China because of more recent events.
Mike, I have a friend that's from Turkey, and like this is like a big slap in the face. It's like throwing shoes at George W. Bush. The Iraqis threw the shoe. This is an insult beyond. I think this could be it, Mike. I really do.
I agree. I mean, they are horribly insulted, and they have a right to be horribly insulted. And it might result with Turkey no longer being so cozy with NATO.
And people don't realize, Russia's got over 20,000 tanks in service. Now, just do the math. That's not including China. They have the largest land army in the world in terms of like tanks and that kind of firepower, where China is edging up, slowly. But
and here there was
win an air war.
There was a story that came out the other day where apparently half of Germany's Leopard 2 tanks cannot be used in combat. They're breaking down. They can't get spare parts. And so we have Russia and China, who have not been involved in all these wars for the last 16 years, and they've got all brand new weapons, and they've been building up, whereas the West has been using up their equipment in all these misadventures in the Mideast, and a lot of our equipment is worn out, it's broken down, and what's coming out of the military-industrial complex is turning out to be junk.
Yeah, we can win an air war, right? Maybe not. We did in Vietnam. Right, and there's no way we can win a ground war against Russia and China, Turkey, Iran, North Korea. North Korea, the one who's a state sponsor of terrorism now.
Yes.
All those people who voted for Bush still think. Trump thinks Trump's doing a good job now. He just keeps. Mike, I don't know. I just gave up with Trump. I think it's finished.
Yeah, I'm afraid we did not get the Donald Trump we thought we were voting for. And, the two issues for me are, of course, the continuation of the war agenda and the fact that Hillary Clinton and her people are still walking around scot-free. And everybody's always trying to drop hints. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. No, don't bother me with predictions. When they slap on the handcuffs, then I'm going to pay attention, okay? Anyway, Dustin.
Fool me once, fool me twice.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Dustin, we're going to let you go here. We're going to switch over to Bill in Iowa. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. On the head, but mostly we all vetoed any law against it and the scatter bombs, And, we can't get any press on Vietnam. They time pictures and World War II and World War I.
Okay,
no.
Bill, I need you to put your mouth closer to the mouthpiece. We got a really bad phone connection, and I'm having a hard time understanding you.
Probably talking too loud.
No, actually you sound better now. What you just did is working a lot better. We were just getting compression errors. Now, I meant to mention this to Dustin.
Message CR52. Welcome to iWireless.
Where is that coming from?
That's his phone. I don't know what happened.
That's his phone. Okay, is he still on the line?
I kind of doubt it.
Okay. Well, as I meant to mention this to Dustin here, but there was a tremendous difference in terms of the U.S. prevailing in the air war over Vietnam, even though ultimately they lost that war, because you can't win a war just from the air. And that was that North Vietnam was using some very old Russian aircraft, and Russia has certainly caught up in the area of military aviation. And military analysts are saying that right now the U.S. does not really have a significant military advantage over Russia. In fact, Russia, according to the latest State Department assessment of the Russian threat, Russia is the stronger power. Good reason not to start a war with them. But again, the lesson of Vietnam is you can't win a war from the air, because we lost that one. And I think I'm in agreement with those who say we're not going to be able to win a conventional ground war either, which is why I'm very concerned about all this talk from people like Paul Craig Roberts, who are saying that there is talk in Washington, D.C. of just hauling on off and having a nuclear attack against the capital cities of everybody who's on our does not get a Christmas card list. So that's a scary thing. Okay, we're going to switch on over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mike? Mike, I just want to say that we were talking about Manson before, and I was listening earlier to InfoWars, and Alex Jones was saying that, you know, MK Ultra, and he was part of that. He was part of the CIA. That's where he got the acid that he was distributing to his flock. I don't know if that's really true or not. However, I will say this: nobody's really talking about this. Lynn Squeaky Fromm,
yes,
who was a member of the Manson family, a few years later came as close as anybody to assassinating President Ford. As a matter of fact, she had a semi-automatic. She had it right in the gut, and if she'd known how to take the safety off, we would have had Ford would have been dead. And there was another attempt by on Ford a little bit later. Also, Sarah Jane Moore, who
yes,
and I'm not sure if he's ex-Marine or active duty Marine, stopped that. Now, the thing is, why I'm bringing that up is it's very interesting if you know who the vice president was at that time. Just as later on, the vice president was Ronald Reagan when the attempted assassination of Reagan happened.
Yeah, and
you know who the vice president was?
Yeah, was Bush, and you know, apparently his family was good friends with the Hinckley family, and you know, Bush may have been trying to accelerate his path into the Oval Office, which he got in there originally. Now, getting on back to this idea about Manson and the CIA, I'm
saying about Rockefeller, actually the vice president during a
Mark. Okay. Yes. First of all, in that period of time in Los Angeles, anybody could find LSD. You didn't need to have to go to the CIA to get it. So that particular line doesn't really hold together. And Manson may have been one of those people who was experimented on as part of MK Ultra. I never really spent a lot of time studying his early life. But we do know that the MK Ultra did dose a lot of people. They're actually the reason LSD became so popular with the hippie culture, is because it didn't really work as a mind-controlled drug. It didn't really work as a truth serum, but boy, was it fun. And that really launched this drug problem, all in the name of national security. And then there was the CIA's Operation Midnight Climax, where they literally ran a bondage place in San Francisco overlooking the bay, where they would bring men on in, and they had these professional dominatrices, and they would dose them with LSD and do all kinds of sex stuff with them to see if they could find a magic combination that would get people to just spill their guts about whatever was inside. And it never really worked, but they ran it for 9 years until finally it was shut down. Anyway, Mark, I'm going to let you go. We got a bunch of stuff that we need to cover in the news here. So getting on back here to the Middle East crisis. Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has basically posted to his Facebook page saying that it's time for the Middle East to form a coalition against Iran. So here you have Israel, which for decades has been the ideological enemy of most of these Arab Muslim states, now calling on them to align with Israel and Saudi Arabia because, by golly, we got to get Iran. Iran's the bad guy. They're the bad guy this time. Last time it was Iraq. This time it's Iran. We got to go get them. And basically, it's more of the same warmongering. I don't know what kind of a response Lieberman is going to get, but at this point it should be obvious to everybody that Riyadh is pushing for war. And it's Iran that has been working on a regional peace process. Iran's foreign minister has said Saudi Arabia accusing Tehran of destabilization can only be described as ironic, as his nation is involved in successful talks on the Syrian peace process, while the Saudis are provoking new regional crises. And that's absolutely true, what's been going on over there. And here we are. Now then, Saudi Arabia is targeting Iran on the claim that Iran was somehow linked to this missile launched from Yemen that came very close to hitting the airport in Riyadh. Now, a UN panel appointed by the United Nations Security Council says they can't find any proof of Saudi Arabia's claim that Iran was responsible for the missile attack. They didn't supply the missile. The missile is a Yemen design and built in Yemen. And so there's absolutely no proof. But at this point, truth is the first casualty of war. They want wars, and they're just going to go on saying lies until they can get people to say, all right, I guess it must be true. I've heard it so many times, which is definitely a major tactic of propaganda. Just keep repeating the lie over and over and over again until people have heard it from so many sources, they figure it just has to be true. And no, a lie repeated a million times remains a lie. Now, so far, this year, 50,000 children in Yemen have died. Most of them of malnutrition. They're starving to death. Some by the cholera epidemic, which may be weaponized. So this war in Yemen has entered a horrific new stage. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go to the phones, interesting article just came across my desk, and I posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently, buried within the recently released batch of Kennedy assassination files, there was a document that talks about a March 22nd, 1962 meeting in which it was discussed the possibility of either buying or recreating Soviet aircraft to carry out false flag attacks on the U.S. to give the U.S. a pretext to go to war against Russia, the Soviet Union. So that kind of fakery has been going on for a long time. And I want you to keep that in mind because we're coming up on three very symbolic targets. We have Thanksgiving this Thursday. And then a month from now, we've got Christmas. And don't forget, just a little while ago, there was that story about how they were convinced ISIS was going to attack the Vatican. And then, of course, we have New Year's. False flags are how these things get done. All right, let's go back to the phones. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mateus, are you there?
Michael, how are you?
There you are. Okay.
All right. So I just wanted to mention that the United States broke away from a one-party system, which was King George,
yes,
the Royals. And so if a one-party system were to be established now, there's a risk that we would break away from it again. So the system is have this fake two-party system, and then when we get really mad with one side, we break away from it, and then we go over to the Democrats, and we get mad at them and go back to Republicans.
Yes.
And so my point is that in my opinion, what's happening now with the Republicans sacrificing their own senator here, this is part of keeping the balance of the fake one-party system. And I believe that there is control, like centralized control, more than you do personally. So from my perspective, this is why this is happening, is to maintain this fake two-part.
Well, that might be a factor in some of the plotters, perpetrators' minds, but there are a couple of overlapping agendas. There is, of course, the fact that Mitch McConnell, gave through his support to another candidate in Alabama, and he's probably still very angry that Judge Roy Moore was able to basically, blow past him in the earlier election. And then, of course, you have the fact that John McCain is already voting pretty much Democratic all the time. And if they can get Jones in there, then the actual makeup of the Senate it won't matter. The elections will still carry for the Democrat liberal agenda, and if they can get a majority in both houses in next year's midterm elections, they are going to move to impeach Donald Trump. So there's a lot of overlapping agendas here right now. But I think the Republican Party, last year we saw the Democratic Party come very close to self-destructing, and the process is still ongoing. And it just boggles the mind that the GOP now seems intent on doing exactly the same thing, destroying itself in the eyes of the public. Mateus, we got to let you go. Got to do station.
Could you hold me over, please? I had two more things. Could you hold me over?
All right, I'll hold you over. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're going to go back to Mateus in Canada. You said you had something else you wanted to add.
Yes, two things kind of related regarding kookification.
Yes.
I'd like to propose to add an extra category. So right now we've got people that are trying to tell the truth, which is you, and okay. Then you've got the people engaged in kookification, which are people that they know what the truth is, but they're trying to mislead us. Now, I want to say there's a third category, which I would fall into, for example, is people that I'm on your side. I believe that I am telling the truth, but I believe something that you don't believe, and so I'm being put into the category of kookification. So I may be wrong, but it's a separate category where I'm not trying to do anything wrong. Okay? So I just want to have that as a third category that many of us fit into when people call in about chemtrails. Okay, I believe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but they're not trying to derail you. They honestly believe this, some of them. And on that note, just for the fun of it,
Go ahead.
And on that note, just for the fun of it, I'd like to extend an olive branch between the two different camps. One say that we walked on the moon, and the other say we didn't walk on the moon. Here's a fun idea that makes everybody happy. Okay, we walked on the moon, but part of the journey was using classified technology that the states did not want to share with the world. So they used some some classified technology, but they portrayed themselves as using more conventional technology.
Okay, Mateus.
So they did have to fake some of the footage.
Mateus, I will put you into that third category where you mean well, but it doesn't mean that the information that you have has not been given to you by somebody who's in category number 2. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and go over to Charlie in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you hear me, Mike?
I hear you now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just want to make a comment about Charlie Manson and the tape murders.
Yes.
That thing is a complete preposterous bunch of crap. It's worse than 9/11. If you read the police report and just look into it, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, 3 women killed, 3 men and 2 women. And you know that guy that got shot in the car was shot, a silencer. And Tex Watson.
I've never heard that. I've never heard. You know, but it's actually easy to fabricate a silencer. I mean, the Irish Republican Army used to use potatoes. They'd take a raw potato, hollow out a hole for the barrel.
But just remember, at night, Mike.
Look, this all happened a long time ago, and I really want to keep the focus on what's going on right now. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. All right. Now, getting on back to the real world here. NATO has announced that they're going to increase their presence in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe as long as necessary to guard against Russian aggression. What they've done is they've restarted the Cold War. And being old enough to remember the last Cold War, they're going to be just feeding you all this stuff about how deadly the enemy is, and they're coming in to destroy your way of life, and we've got to spend all of our money on weapons to deter them from doing what they're doing. And during the whole Cold War, with the exception of the Cuban Missile Crisis, none of the prognostications ever came true. And obviously with the Cuban Missile Crisis, everybody backed down toward the end there. This is all about government and the Pentagon needing a reason, a justification to take away your tax money and not spend it on you, which a mature, well-functioning republic would be doing. So that's what it is. They wanted the Cold War back. The Cold War went away with the Soviet Union. And we saw all these articles years ago where the defense planners are saying, we need a new Cold War. We need to have a new enemy. Oh, well, we'll have the war on poverty and the war on drugs and the war on global warming and all the rest of it. But none of them had the sizzle of the Cold War against the evil Soviet Union. I even saw an article the other day that's accusing Putin of trying to bring back the Soviet Union. And they're really out there trying to sell this idea that we have to be so afraid of the Russians that we will send our children into white-hot flaming death wherever directed, and that we just sacrifice all of our own personal wealth and products of our labor so that the defense contractors can make more of these F-35s that don't really work, the Zumwalt stealth destroyer, which doesn't really go anywhere. And I'll give you another example of just how foolish Western military spending is. The French have built this frigate, Lafayette, and it is a stealth frigate, incorporates the latest in stealth technology, and they basically sailed it on into the Black Sea, and the Russians called up and said, you do know we can see this thing, right? So it turns out it's not really all that stealthy. But I'll bet it cost a huge amount of money. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Here is something about stealth technology. All stealth technology is designed to deal with radars within a specific frequency range in order to basically have the radio waves fly off in a different direction. And it's been discovered that some of the older, lower frequency radars have no problem at all picking up like the F-22. And stealth technology is always designed to deflect and conceal itself from a radar where the radar emitter and the radar detector are the same antenna. But if they're separated, if you're having one antenna sending out the radar signals and another antenna listening for the echoes, they'll pick up the stealth. It's overhyped. It's not as good. Remember when they went into Iraq and they featured the stealth fighters to go on in and basically laser designate for standoff-launched munitions. And they said, oh, the stealth works. Then, of course, they sent one in to Kosovo without any of the other supporting aircraft, and it got shot down. So here we have another indication that Russian technology is way ahead of American technology. And that's a good argument right there for not letting this war go any further. Meanwhile, apparently the head of Russia's lower house defense committee, Vladimir Shamanov, has come on out and said that if the U.S. sends offensive weapons to Kiev, the situation in Ukraine could very easily explode. It's another one of these hot spots out there. Now, apparently Poland people in Poland are blocking the western border where thousands of heavy trucks have accumulated in anticipation of permission to cross from Ukraine. And apparently Poland is not going to allow trucks with goods in because of the politics in Kiev. And by the way, Ukraine now has their own version of Hillary Clinton because apparently Ukraine's First Lady, Marina Poroshenko, is suspected of involvement in money laundering through international humanitarian agencies, like the Clinton Charitable Foundation. So apparently this is something that is actually more widespread across the globe, and people need to understand that. Now, as you know, some of the Maidan snipers have gone public. Remember when that whole coup d'etat was taking place in Kiev and there were snipers up there and they were killing people, and it was all blamed on Yanukovych. But these snipers have come on out and said basically they were working for the opposition. They were working for the coup plotters, and their orders were very simple. Fire in all directions, cause as much chaos and outrage as you can. And they killed 80 people. So again, it was a false flag operation. The opposition sent in the snipers, they killed a bunch of people, and they blamed it on Ukraine's elected government. false flags are very, very common. There's even a list of something like 49 that governments officially admit to having done, which tells us there are probably thousands more that they haven't. And like this article that just came on in from the Kennedy assassination papers, there was a serious discussion about buying Soviet aircraft from one of the Soviet Union's military customers, or even building an exact copy to carry out a false flag attack on the United States to justify war against the Soviet Union. This is how these things get done. And we have to be on the lookout for this right now, because we can see how much the people who are behind this rush to war, they want to move it forward. And they're dealing with ordinary people, general populations, that are war-weary. We're all sick and tired of war. We're sick and tired of the costs of the war. We're sick and tired of our young people coming back from these battles in wheelchairs and cheap metal boxes covered with American flags made in China. And the same sentiment is in all these other countries. They're tired of all of this nonsense. They want it to stop. So at this point, I think they're desperate enough to try another false flag. And it's going to be a big one. Crashing airplanes into skyscrapers, passé. Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt. It's going to have to be something so big and so shocking, people won't dare take the chance it's not true. Now, over in Germany, their leader of the Alternative for Germany party is urging Chancellor Merkel to resign as the coalition talks collapse. Yesterday we were reporting on how Angela Merkel had missed her own self-imposed deadline to form a new government following Germany's recent elections. And apparently the other parties that she was talking to have literally walked on out of the room. They can't come to an agreement on the migration issue because Merkel still wants the open borders, and everybody else says it's time to control the borders and get all this crime and sexual assault and infectious diseases under control. So now that Angela Merkel's fourth term as chancellor is in doubt, it's actually had an effect on the euro, and it's headed down. And there may be a call for snap elections. And I don't think Merkel's going to do as well in the next one as she did in the last one. And she didn't do well in those at all. Now, as one of the callers mentioned earlier in the show, Donald Trump has declared North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism. Oh, do you have an example of terrorism they sponsored? No, we're just going to declare them. North Korea had been on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Then they were taken off when it looked like North and South Korea were going to get buddy-buddy and reunify. And now that whole reunification project has been sabotaged, yes, Trump is declaring North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism. This allows the U.S. government to take more punitive steps against North Korea. Gives the U.S. government additional powers over defense, exports, arms control, financial restrictions, and restrictions of U.S. foreign assistance. And it opens the door for more sanctions. Now, currently, there are 4 countries on the list of state sponsors of terrorism: North Korea, Iran, Sudan, and Syria. And the list is it's a weapon. It's a weapon to justify more abuse hurled at the target country, even though there's no evidence that these countries are actually engaging in state-sponsored terror. I mean, if you really think about it, the U.S. was sending weapons and supplies to both ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. That makes the United States government a state sponsor of terror, given that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are advertised to us as terrorist groups. Now, South Korea claims they've detected a possible engine test at North Korea's missile facility. And it stands to reason they're going to be testing their engines. I remember when I lived in the San Fernando Valley, over at that laboratory that's now heavily contaminated. They used to test rocket engines there. Everybody heard it. Everybody could hear it. All it takes is a sensitive microphone, and you can hear these things. They're very, very loud. But it looks like North Korea may be thinking about another missile test in the very near future. And again, When the U.S. tests missiles, nobody says anything. When Russia tested missiles, nobody said anything. Testing missiles is part of the process of making sure they're going to perform the way you want to perform when they're actually going to be used. But in the case of North Korea, a missile test, oh, that's a dangerous provocation. We can't let them have missiles. Sounds a lot like Iran. Oh, we can't let Iran have missiles. When we invade them, we want it to be easy. We can't whip them in a fair fight, so we've got to find some way to take away their weapons first, and then we'll go on in and whoop them. Because the U.S. is really good at beating up on countries who don't have the means to defend themselves. Although, obviously, that didn't work out too well in Syria. Now, we are getting reminders from certain voices that Donald Trump cannot, on his own, declare war on North Korea. Only Congress can. And they're responding to Donald Trump's rhetoric about totally destroying North Korea during his September United Nations speech. And on his recent Asia trip, he flatly stated, the era of strategic patience has ended. And yes, in terms of the foreign interventions agenda, we did not get the Donald Trump we all voted for. And I'm very, very concerned over the fact that our weapons aren't working that well. Trump's strike on that Syrian air base was a good example. 60 cruise missiles launched. One failed coming right out of the tube. Of the remaining 59, most of them missed the air base entirely, and those that hit the air base did not hit anything important. Contrast that with the long-range cruise missiles Russia is using against the ISIS bases in Syria. They're all hitting their targets. We are very foolish as a nation to move forward on a war agenda knowing the problems that exist with our weapons, knowing the problems that exist within the rank-and-file military. Remember that story about 60 admirals, 6-0, caught up in this corruption probe, the Fat Leonard corruption scandal. Now, apparently an Israeli tank has fired a warning shot towards Syria for a second time in 2 days. And basically, Israel's claim is that Syria is violating the 1974 ceasefire by strengthening a military post in the demilitarized zone between Syria and Israel. Well, Israel's never been all that good about keeping their promises on various agreements, so they're hardly one to talk. They're trying to provoke Syria into firing back, and then the war will be on. Now, apparently, Israel has released declassified documents from the 6-day war and reveals that the plan to literally starve Gaza and to displace the Palestinians goes all the way back to 1967. Everything that's been going on in Palestine and the West Bank is deliberate and it is intentional. It's not a response to terror from Gaza or the bottle rockets. It's what Israel wanted. Israel wants Eretz Israel. Israel doesn't want Middle East peace. They want a piece of the Middle East. They want a bigger piece of the Middle East. Now, interestingly enough, Israeli Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz has admitted that Tel Aviv has had covert contacts with Saudi Arabia for quite some time. I wonder if it goes all the way back to 9/11. Meanwhile, apparently, Soviet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did have an interrogation with the police that lasted for hours. And Netanyahu is suspected of taking expensive gifts from representatives of the business community. And investigators believe that Netanyahu agreed with this country's largest publishing house, Yediot Aharonot, that the government activities should be covered in the press from a positive angle. In response, Netanyahu promised to pass a law limiting the powers of the main competitor to that newspaper. And they're saying that these charges may be sufficient enough to force him to resign. I doubt it. It's going to take a crowbar to get Netanyahu out of that office. There'll be claw marks in the desktop and on the door frame going on out. Now, the U.S. State Department has announced that the Palestinian diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C. must shut down, saying that the Palestinians violated U.S. law by calling on the International Criminal Court to prosecute Israel authorities for war crimes committed in Palestine. So, once again, you have the U.S. out there protecting Israel. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, have you ever noticed that people who are in high government positions, when they're in those positions, they will go along with the agenda. And then after they're out of the positions, they seem more willing to speak their mind. And we saw that with Colin Powell, who was up there at the United Nations with his little vial of talcum powder talking about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. And then after he was out of his office, he came on out and he said he knew it was a lie. He didn't want to do it. He was told he had to do it. And now we have former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is criticizing Israeli leaders for being uninterested in peace. And he went so far as to praise Palestinians for their commitment to nonviolence. Well, I'm going to have to take back some of the bad things I said about John Kerry. Now, apparently over in the occupied West Bank, there is a holy site, the Jonah Tomb, and it's venerated by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, but apparently hundreds of Israeli settlers stormed the tomb and desecrated it. So things are definitely ramping up over there. Meanwhile, the U.S. is quietly building up their number of troops in Somalia. Apparently, we're back in Somalia again. And I think it's becoming obvious that the American people probably don't know just how many countries the U.S. government has sent troops into. I think they're trying to keep that quiet from us, keep us all distracted with sex allegations and all the rest of that. I think if the American people were to get a good view of U.S. militarism around the globe, they'd realize how dangerously close we are to a real world war. And we ended World War II with the use of nuclear weapons. We might start World War III with nuclear weapons. There's been all this dangerous talk about, avoiding the risk of a conventional front against front war with a military peer and just go in for a decapitation. All right, let's talk about the economic news here now. Fans of Bitcoin are now admitting it's never going to work as a universal payment system, and now they're touting the idea of digital gold to acquire Bitcoins and hang on to them, which at the moment seems to be a good idea because Bitcoin is going up and going up and going up and going up. But I got to tell you, I'm getting a real strong smell of tulips with this, and it feels to me like it's a classic pump and dump. And I would be there's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme, except somebody else is getting rich. Now, here's an article, and you have to wonder what these people are thinking about. This is over at adn.com, and they're talking about the growing problem where people who are unable to pay their student loan bills are being subject to measures which basically mean they can no longer work. And 19 states now have setups where government agencies can seize state-issued professional licenses from residents who default on their education debts. This includes firefighters, nurses, teachers, lawyers, massage therapists, barbers, psychologists, and real estate brokers can all have their credentials suspended or revoked. Another state, South Dakota, takes away your driver's license. Well, if you're taking away the ability of people to work, how do you expect to get paid? It makes no sense at all. And the reason these people are unable to pay their student loan debts is because they got lied to. When they went to college, they were told there are going to be these high-paying jobs on your graduation. You'll be able to pay off your student loan debt in just a few years, and then you're off to a life of plenty. And it simply did not happen. The high-paying jobs aren't here. They've all been offshored. we're in a situation right now where young people are probably better off not going to college unless they have a career track already laid out. Certainly you don't want to go to college and get an art history major degree, and become a liberal snowflake. You're going to have to pay for that forever. All right, we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We've got an update from Alabama. Apparently, poll numbers coming in from last night. Roy Moore has now built a 15-point lead over his Democratic rival. So this whole accusation, sexual harassment, everything, it's all falling apart. The problem is they did it too much. They should have just gone with a few and just worked on that. But with the revelation that the yearbook inscription was clearly forged, and then they're constantly trying to find more and more people to throw at Roy Moore as the earlier accusers were discredited, made it very obvious what was going on. So, good for Moore and good for the people of Alabama here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
All right, we're going to take... Hello, Michael.
Yes.
I was calling to talk about Hillary Clinton and Bill. They had an interview. It was some celebration of Bill Clinton being elected 25 years ago.
Yes.
And she said she tells this little story about some people, her devoted supporters, going around door to door and being greeted by a lot of people. This is worth talking about on air, in public, in front. She said that a lot of people were saying that they couldn't support her because she kills people.
Yes.
And they couldn't support her because she's involved in pedophilia. And I just want to know what you think about her talking like this in public, on the air, an interview. I think it was on Fox. And isn't that turning some page? It's like the thou dost protest too much, lady. It's something like guilt.
Well, no, she's trying to play the victim card again. By implying that all the talk about pedophilia was just made up by her enemies, and all the stuff about the dead bodies list was made up by her enemies. And certainly with regard to the dead bodies, there was definitely something there. I found evidence of cover-up in the death of Vince Foster. And if there's evidence of a cover-up, then something is being covered up. If Foster were really a suicide, you wouldn't have the FBI going on out and trying to fraudulently manufacture the testimony of the widow regarding the gun that was found with the body. It would have to be Foster's gun if it was a real suicide. So when you find evidence of a cover-up, obviously something is being covered up. And again, the trail of dead bodies behind the Clintons, all the way back to Arkansas, is rather impressive. And so I can understand why people are saying that, the Clintons had people killed. Larry Nichols used to work for them, and he has admitted that he did kill people on the orders of the Clintons.
Yeah, oh my God. Have you heard if they have the identity yet of that fourth person who was killed in the helicopter airplane crash by the Rothschilds' mansion?
No, I haven't. I know everybody is trying to leap to the conclusion that Rothschild himself has died, but there's been no confirmation of that yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Well, okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the news here, economic news here. Interesting little story coming out of King World News. And apparently the story is one of the two largest banks in Switzerland flat out refused to hand over a client's physical gold. And this is not the first time this has happened, where people who have placed their gold for safekeeping in the bank will come on in and say, I want to take it out, and the bank will say, well, we can't give it to you, or we can't give you all of it because of the banking rules. There are rules. We're not allowed to give you your gold. Well, the client of the bank did something quite creative. He asked for a letter from the bank stating in writing over a bank official signature that they refused to hand his gold to him. And then he said he was going to take that letter to the police. And the bank then agreed that he had every right to take his gold out of the bank. Very generous of the bank to basically allow the client to take their assets out. But the banks want to hang on to it. They want to hang on to the money. They want to hang on to the gold. They've got all these restrictions where the bank is now exercising control over your financial affairs. And that's not what banks are supposed to do. And an even more alarming indicator along this comes out of Zero Hedge, where European Central Bank is proposing an end to deposit protection. And the idea is they issued a statement, covered deposits and claims under investor compensation schemes should be replaced by limited discretionary exemptions to be granted by the competent authority in order to retain a degree of flexibility. Now, what that jargon really means is if one of the banks of Europe or the ECB itself gets into trouble, okay, there is no longer going to be a mechanism that allows your money to be replaced in full. What they'll do is they will decide how much money you happen to need right now, and that's what you'll get. So if you need to get out money to go get your food, you may have to wait a few days for the competent authority to decide what the appropriate amount of your own money you'll be given to eat, pay bills, and get to work. So that seems to be the next stage of the private central banks, is for them to be controlling your financial affairs for you. And that, of course, dovetails in with this idea of a cashless society, where you'll go into the bakery shop and say, I want a jelly donut, and you run your plastic card, and it comes on back and says, the bank says you need to lose weight. So no, you may not have the jelly donut. Getting kind of big for their britches, those bankers, I think, here. Now, a little bit of an embarrassment for Theresa May. Apparently, her husband has been linked to the Paradise Papers. Apparently, his company was accused of arranging investments in tax havens. And these documents have come on out showing how Britain's mega-rich are investing their money abroad to legally avoid paying hefty tax bills. And, of course, that's going on in all the countries. The taxes are to be paid by the middle class. That's what the middle class is there for. The rich elites, they're allowed to keep their wealth because, I mean, after all, they're money addicts. If you force them to give up their money, they'll go into withdrawal. They'll roll around on the floor. They'll sweat. They'll throw up. We can't have that happening to these highly placed individuals. It would be humiliating and embarrassing. Over in France, the French courier Chronopost has announced it will no longer deliver any packages to the heavily migrant-populated Seine-Saint-Denis suburb or on the outskirts of Paris because the area is too dangerous. It's a no-go zone. Over in Sweden, their cost of the open borders policy is starting to really ramp up. Apparently, sex offenses have hit a record high following the migrant influx. Crime in all categories has hit an all-time high following the migrant influx. Meanwhile, up in Brussels, Muslims are rioting, and basically they flooded the streets. Apparently, after Morocco qualified for the World Cup, stores looted, windows broken. Apparently, a Christmas market was attacked, and fires were being set. Meanwhile, down in Germany, in the Bavaria region, which is a very lovely part of Germany, apparently 200 churches have been damaged and Christian symbols destroyed. Now, one of the things you will see in Bavaria is there are crosses on many of the tops of hills. Now, they're not going to interfere with aviation or anything like that. They're just up there. Usually the local community has put them up there. These are being destroyed. They're being cut down or set on fire. So now we have jihad in Bavaria. Here in the United States, there's been a little bit of an upset. Apparently, a border agent has been killed by illegal immigrants, and they killed him by literally crushing his head with rocks. This has provoked a lot of outrage and a demand to accelerate the timetable on Trump's border wall. Now, we've talked about this before. Remember Obama's unaccompanied minors program, where children without parents were allowed into the country, and they were part of the Dreamers, the DACA Act, and so forth. And people kept saying, they don't look like children. They look like adults. And now it's turned out that Obama's unaccompanied minors who were allowed into the country have become deadly gang members, first and foremost MS-13. And that's leading to a surge in crime in America's cities as well. It's like the people who are pushing for this globalist society, this new world order, the open borders, they don't care about the harm they are bringing to these countries. They simply don't care. They have this dream of a one-world government with their own rear ends sitting on the golden throne of planet Earth. That's their dream, and no amount of ancillary human suffering is going to discourage them. It's just not important. Now, John Cornyn, Chris Murphy, and Dianne Feinstein have announced a new gun control bill, and it's focusing on background checks for gun purchases. Now, they're claiming this will strengthen the background check system in the wake of the Texas church attack. Well, the problem that we seem to be having is there are laws that are simply not being followed. In the case of the California shooting, there was a court order barring this individual from owning guns. The police simply weren't enforcing it. So what we have here is Congress is going to look good passing new laws, or they're going to look bad, depending upon your point of view. But if the laws are not being enforced, nothing really changes. It's the same thing with immigration. They're out there talking about, we need a new immigration law. No, we've got immigration law. It's not being enforced. It's called Title VIII. Forget about standing up and making speeches and passing new laws. We've already got too many laws. Let's enforce the ones that we have. Now, Gabby Gifford's gun-grabbing group has caused a bit of a stir. They came on out with a list of things to be banned, the new bump stocks, and on the list was a muzzle loader. And apparently, Tucker Carlson took over a Democrat on the issue of banning muzzle loaders. And during the interview, it became very obvious this Democrat had no idea what he was talking about. His whole attitude is, well, all guns have a muzzle, and so we should be banning these things. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, and I imagine most of you probably already do, a muzzle loader is a gun where you load from the front end of the barrel. You pour in some powder, you put in some wadding, you put down a ball, you ram it down, and the fact is that you don't see people committing crimes with muzzle loaders. Basically, Tucker Carlson was out there saying it takes a minute to load a muzzle loader. Now, he's a little off on that. If you're using a punch card, you can do a reload in as little as 15 seconds. But still, you're not going to see a mass shooter out there with a flintlock or caplock rifle. They're not going to commit crimes with it. Muzzle loaders right now, because they're considered antiques and not really considered a major crime problem, are exempt from most federal regulation. That's why a lot of people who just want to put holes in paper do so with muzzle loaders. And now Gabby Giffords is out there, and she's getting support from liberals that muzzle loaders have to be banned. When was the last time somebody was assassinated with a muzzle loader? As far as I know, that was Abraham Lincoln. So, they really jumped the shark on that one. And it just makes that whole gun-grabbing agenda look silly. Now, there's a church, River at Tampa Bay Church, and they have a sign out front that says, this is not a gun-free zone. We are heavily armed, and we will use deadly force. That's how you're going to do it. That's how you're going to discourage these shooters. These gun-free zone signs are like advertising. It's a giant open-air shooting gallery. Come on in and have fun. Nobody's going to shoot back at you. Look at all the mass shootings that have taken place in places that had these gun-free zone signs. The church has the right idea. Instead of gun-free zone, put up a sign that says half the homes in this neighborhood are armed. You guess which ones. That's how you create a deterrent. But the gun grabbers love the mass shootings. The gun grabbers love the violence and the bloodshed because it furthers their agenda of total disarmament of the American people so the government can abuse us even more than they do now. Well, that's okay. You can call the police. Well, maybe, if you want to get stoned. Federal agents have arrested a Philadelphia police officer earlier today, accusing him of conspiring with officers in Baltimore to sell cocaine and heroin seized from that city's streets. Prosecutors say that Eric Troy Snell, 33 years old, earned thousands of dollars serving as a conduit between corrupt members of a Baltimore police task force who stole the drugs and his brother who sold them in Philadelphia. Investigators have also accused Snell of threatening the children of a Baltimore officer who pled guilty in the case. And again, when I was in college, the best drug connection in town was a California Highway Patrol officer, was selling the stuff right out of the trunk of his black and white unit. Would confiscate it from the drug dealers and say, I'm just going to let you go, but I'm going to confiscate the drugs. And then he'd turn around and sell them. And he left the police force, left the Highway Patrol, and he bought himself a Radio Shack franchise. So, yeah, we're all going to be depending on the police here. Now, there's been a big, nasty debate going on over President Trump allowing the remains of elephants hunted for sport in Zimbabwe to be brought into the United States as trophies. There's been a ban on such things since 2014, and the PETA people and everything were kind of up in arms about it, and now we're hearing that the ban will continue. But there's another side of this, because these areas where these animals are being hunted, if nobody's hunting them and controlling the population, they damage farms and they damage crops. And the money collected for the license to hunt an elephant or a water buffalo or something can actually bring a lot of much-needed wealth to these African towns. So there are two sides to this story. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we had another little interruption on Skype. And I did a little research on this. And apparently Skype, the new version of Skype that came out in August, has a problem with Realtek audio devices, which unfortunately are quite common. And apparently it's really hit a lot of Windows 10 machines. And I would love to go back to an earlier version of Skype that worked, but apparently they've all now been obsoleted by Microsoft, and none of them will connect with their cloud server, which has got its own problems with latency and so forth. And I think Microsoft made a really bad move here by forcing everybody to use the new version of Skype long before it was actually ready. But then that seems to be the way things are being done in this country. And so I'm probably going to have to buy a new updated computer that doesn't use Realtek audio drivers for that part of my system here. So I guess that's going to be my Christmas present to myself, another laptop. All right, getting on back here to what's going on around the world. Apparently, the U.S. is hindering humanitarian aid from reaching Iran. Now, as you know, they had a really major quake there last week. And there are Iranian organizations in the United States that want to send money to basically fund rescue operations and help those people who've lost their homes. And unfortunately, the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the U.S. Department of the Treasury is basically putting a maximum of $500,000 per year, maybe legally transferred to Iran. Well, that's not really a tremendous amount of money. And again, U.S. policy is harming the innocents. And I'm sure the strategic thinking is, well, we're going to make Iran pay for all the rescue and the recovery from the earthquake, and they'll have less money to build missiles to keep us from invading their country. Now, getting on over to the world of political correctness, there is a professor over at Occidental, Lisa Wade. She's a sociology professor at Occidental College. And is out there in a new article saying that you should be suspicious of males who strongly identify as men. And the rationale there, coming from the world of political correctness, is gender is fluid, and really, ultimately, there isn't really any gender at all. Therefore, men who identify as men, there's something wrong with them. I guess I fall into that category here. But it really is getting into la-la land out there. There are two genders determined biologically. And this idea that you can be whatever gender you want to be regardless of your body is really getting ridiculous. Caitlyn Jenner has had the surgery and she's had the chemicals and all the rest of that, but if you check her DNA, that's a guy in there. And no amount of political correct lip flapping is going to change that reality. And that really is one of the worst aspects of liberalism right now, is this idea that they can disconnect from reality. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about computers and computer security, which is almost non-existent in this day and age. And certainly this shadow group, which acquired, hacked, stole, we don't know how, all of the NSA's taxpayer-funded cyber weapons tools and has now put them out for sale, means that it's no longer just the government that is a threat to your privacy and security. It's basically every hacker on planet Earth who now have these very potent cyber weapons at their disposal. So that was extraordinarily reckless and careless, and it doesn't stop there. Pentagon mass surveillance has been slurping up the world's social media traffic to try and look out for people who are planning terrorist events, like anybody who's actually planning a terrorist event is going to do it on social media. And they basically had this huge treasure trove of social media posts, 1.8 billion of them, they accumulated over 8 years as part of its global surveillance system. And then they basically stored it on a publicly accessible Amazon cloud server, which means anybody can get on in there and start trolling through your social media to look for information for possibly nefarious purposes. Apparently, Android smartphones running Lollipop, Marshmallow, and Nougat are vulnerable to an attack that exploits the media projection service to capture the user's screen and record the system audio. And this affects about 77% of all Android devices. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, getting on back to Microsoft and how they botched up Skype. Apparently, in Microsoft's latest patch of updates for Windows, something that they changed has now basically started disabling old Epson dot matrix printers. Now, probably a lot of you are out there saying, well, who uses dot matrix printers any longer? Actually, a lot of people who are still working with accounting software like Sage, who want the forms to come on out in a sheet feed, they're using it. But apparently these Epson dot matrix printers stopped working after applying the patch to Windows 10 and Windows 7. It just seems to eat the print job. It doesn't get out there. Part of the problem is that over time, with this rush to always have a new feature as a selling tool, we've allowed the infrastructure to become so complex it can't be managed any longer. And their solution is, well, we're just going to replace everything every 5 years. But that doesn't really solve the problem. In this economy, people don't want to replace things every 5 years. They can't afford to. And so a lot of people are basically caught with this idea that if they're going to stay in business, if they're going to keep on doing what they're doing, they have to find a way to keep their equipment working longer and longer, against an industry which seems intent on still forcing this planned obsolescence. In this case, the Epson printers. Now, as you know, the Army has a long history of using their soldiers for experiments. We know about the story where they marched a bunch of soldiers into the aftermath of a nuclear bomb test in Nevada to see if it was feasible for soldiers to exploit the breach in the enemy lines. And those soldiers who were in that experiment spent the rest of their lives with various cancers and leukemias. And veterans' rights groups are now claiming the U.S. Army is withholding crucial information about chemical and biological agents veterans were exposed to in experimentation. And apparently the military was conducting experiments with chemicals that would induce fear, panic, hysteria, and hallucinations in enemy soldiers. And at least 70,000 of our troops were used in the experiments, according to a 2015 NPR report. Nasty stuff out there. Now, as you know, last week we had a guest who apparently successfully treated his prostate cancer with cannabis, and a lot of our readers started sending in all these articles about how scientists in the United States showed that cannabis was killing cancer cells, and the same thing in Great Britain. And then all of a sudden there was a pushback saying, oh, no, cannabis is evil. Cannabis is, it's taking away money from the liquor and the tobacco companies. We can't say that there's anything good about it. And so one of the articles they put on up there was from dailyhealthpost.com, where they put together a collection of over 100 scientific peer-reviewed studies that showed cannabis annihilates cancer. And these were followed by an onslaught of negative warnings about cannabis, most of which are likely linked to or generated by drug companies that stand to lose billions on these dangerous cancer drugs now considered the orthodox treatment. And again, what is best for the patient is no longer a factor in modern medical care. I remember there was a big stink many years ago over a very simple, very inexpensive chemical called hydrazine sulfate, which helped people basically deal with cancer symptoms. Wasn't touted as a cancer cure, but it made the problems cancer causes go away. And it was given prominence because Bob Guccione's wife came down with cancer and decided to undergo the hydrazine sulfate therapy. Hydrazine sulfate, my mistake. And it was working for her. And then, unfortunately, she passed away from an unrelated medical crisis. Apparently, she was undergoing surgery and something happened on the table here. But the big stink came on out because Bob Guccione did some digging, and he found out that hydrazine sulfate had been the victim of a scam by the National Cancer Institute, because hydrazine sulfate works only when you're not getting any other form of cancer treatment. If you're taking chemotherapy, it won't work. If you're getting radiation, it won't work. And yet the National Cancer Institute, when they finally agreed to have a trial, because this drug is used all over Europe and Russia, they literally rigged the test by testing hydrazine sulfate on cancer patients already undergoing chemotherapy. And it's all done to protect the orthodox cancer establishment, which makes huge amounts of money off of conventional chemotherapy and these radiation machines. And there have been studies that show that even if your cancer is killed by radiation, it will be back 5 years down the road, 5 or 6 years down the road, and it'll be more aggressive than it was before. And as for chemotherapy, it's basically a controlled poisoning. And even if it cures your cancer, what's left is just going to be ravaged by the chemicals. And I got to see this close up and personal with my mother, who was given both chemotherapy and radiation treatments for her cancer. And to this date, I still don't know if she died of the cancer or if she died of the cancer treatment. Now, the FCC is planning a vote next month to kill the Obama-era rules demanding fair treatment of web traffic. And it may decide to vacate the regulations altogether. This is net neutrality. And this is basically going to reignite this debate that basically has seen Republicans and broadband providers wanting to eliminate the rules, while Democrats and technology companies support them. The problem is, if these rules are rescinded, then your internet service provider can simply decide to put you in the slow lane. And there have already been allegations of throttling by the internet service providers. Spectrum, which is what I'm stuck with here in Hawaii, they actually got sued by the state of New York because the actual bandwidth coming into the home was not what was being advertised and being billed for. And Spectrum said they're not throttling, but if you go into their own website, there's a place in there where they say that in the interest of balancing the load, they may temporarily reduce the speed of operation. And their rationale is it's not throttling because we didn't use the word throttle. And apparently the FCC has already received more than 22 million comments on the matter, where people think that the common carrier rules that applied to the broken up phone company should apply to the internet. All traffic is treated equally. But the ISPs, they want to give favorable treatment to the streaming providers and us troublesome independent media sites. Well, we'll just crank down their bandwidth. It's not like anybody's paying attention to them here. Apparently, over in California's elementary schools, they have new history textbooks that are pro-LGBT. And I'm not sure exactly what's in there. They're trying to imply that certain famous individuals in our history were transsexual. But again, this politicalization of education has reached a crisis point. Our children are not being educated. They're being indoctrinated. They're not being taught to solve problems in the future. They're just being taught to regurgitate what they're told to believe. Now, you remember the big stink over the Tuam orphanages in Ireland that were being run by the Catholics, and how these children were being sold off to rich Americans for adoption, and how many of them were abused and a lot of them died and they were buried in this abandoned well. Apparently, they found another such incident over in Scotland. And apparently there was this orphanage run by Catholic nuns, and they thought that there were maybe a few bodies down there, and the excavation revealed 400 children. So that's ugly. That really is ugly. How can you treat a child like that? All right, let's take a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Good evening, Michael. What's on my mind is the things I've been seeing on the news lately, especially today, is kind of perplexing. I don't know if you had a chance to see how much illegal immigration is costing the medical profession in this country.
Yeah, it's a huge cost. It's cost
$8 billion.
It's not just the medical costs; it's the social services. You know, a lot of these people are not on jobs; they're applying for welfare. It is a huge, huge cost.
Yeah, OAN, One American News has been talking about it for the last day or so, about illegal immigration. Of course, you had a border agent got shot, I guess, or murdered yesterday at the border. Trump, we definitely need to build the wall and all that. But another thing, Michael, I did notice. I don't know if you're a fan of Newsmax TV, but they did run a documentary a few nights ago about Uncle Hitler. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but maybe you should look at that, because that is unbelievable. When the hour special they showed, well, actually it was a 6-hour special, but the hour I saw of the first cousin of Eva Braun speaking and telling the truth about World War II was very mind-blowing to me. And I don't know why that's not taught in school for the last 60 years.
Well, again, the purpose of public education is to raise young people to be useful to the government. And that means, giving them a set of beliefs and assumptions that make them pliant and obedient and useful. It's reached its nadir with Common Core, which is creating the illusion of an educated younger generation without really educating them. Most kids are already starting to go on out and say that if they want to learn something really important, they have to just do it on their own time.
Absolutely. It was just a really unbelievable documentary that was really pertaining to the truth of what really happened in World War II and how the Rothschilds, and it was just amazing to me what has been hidden from the American public. very unbelievable. Like the Kennedy files and the Kennedy assassination. This goes even way further back than that, and it was just unbelievable. It's mind-blowing that this one lady happened to be still alive, and nobody wants to claim the money for Mein Kampf. But I'm like, wow, Newsmax running a documentary like this is unbelievable. It was unbelievable watching that. It really was.
Yeah. Well, when I first started out on this voyage of truth discovery, I started out thinking, well, we've got a problem now. But as I dug deeper and deeper, I've come to the realization, and I think most Americans would agree with me now, the government has been lying to us, the corporate media has been lying to us all along. I'll give you a good example. You know the story about George Washington and the cherry tree? Father, I cannot tell a lie? Never happened. It was cooked up during Washington's political campaign. So, yeah, they've been lying to us all along, and we just need to accept that as an axiom anytime they try and tell us another lie. You can't trust anything coming out of the corporate media except the weather and the sports scores, and they're not all that good on the weather.
You're right on, Michael. I wonder if Franken's going to resign, Michael. What do you think?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Al Franken, do you think he's going to step down or he's going to stick it out, try to stick it out with the Democrat Party?
Oh, he's going to try and stick it on out because they're aiming to take over both houses of Congress next year, so he's not going to step down. And there's all these liberals and pundits out there saying, well, come on, he was just being a comedian. It wasn't really sexual assault and blah, 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 blah. But again, they're just underscoring the hypocrisy. Anyway, Tom, I think you already called in earlier to the show today.
No, I didn't.
There was somebody.
The first time I called in.
Oh, okay. All right. Because we'd like to hold it to just one call
I wouldn't do that to you.
Per caller per day. Anyway, listen.
No, Michael, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to let you go anyway because I got to get back to the news here. We're running short on time. Now, as you know, they had a huge spill in South Dakota from the Keystone XL pipeline, 5,000 barrels. It's a huge, huge mess. And the industry supporters are out there saying, well, look, we admit pipelines are going to spill. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's just something you're all going to have to accept, living along that pipeline route, for the benefits of having oil and gas technology in your lives here. And it was a little bit awkward. And TransCanada has been forced to shut down the pipeline following this huge release. Despite this, Nebraska regulators have approved the route of the Keystone XL pipeline through their state. Apparently, they're unconcerned with what might happen if there's a leak. Because remember, raw petroleum is toxic. It is poisonous. It is carcinogenic. Now, I'm convinced that if the oil industries were required to build leak-proof pipelines, they could. It's just a pipe. But they want to build them as cheaply as possible to maximize profitability. Now then, as you know, Thursday is Thanksgiving, and apparently the indications are there might be a white Thanksgiving in Washington, D.C., and much of the Atlantic seaboard. This is according to AccuWeather senior meteorologist Brett Anderson. Meanwhile, in western Washington, ski and snowboard season is officially underway. So huzzah, huzzah there. And amazingly enough, down in Cape Town, now remember, they're south of the equator. They're supposed to be coming up on their summer. And they're still getting snow. Same thing in Australia. Summer snow, giant hail. Now, the latest word coming out from the global warming community is, no, there never was a pause in global warming. The only problem was we had a lack of data from the Arctic, and it made it look like global warming had taken a pause. But no, trust us, it's still going on. It's still a major, major threat. Meanwhile, over in Russia, astrophysicist Dr. Habibullo Abdusamatov, head of Space Research Laboratory at the Pulkovo Observatory of the Russian Academy of Sciences, is saying we're already in the new little ice age. It's started. And basically saying that the quasi-centennial variation, or quasi-bicentennial variation in total solar radiance is basically trending toward a new low. We have all of these overlapping solar cycles that they're starting to figure on out. And they're all meeting at the low point over the next couple of years. So he's basically saying, as near as he can tell, the new little ice age began years ago, 2015. Meanwhile, the Pope is out there rebuking climate deniers as perverse. This from the church that tortured Galileo for saying that the Earth orbited around the sun. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, let's talk a little bit about Fukushima. Epic disaster, world's worst nuclear accident by far. And apparently, 6 years after the meltdown, they have finally managed to get a robot in to find the reactor's melted uranium fuel. And they're using this little tiny submersible robot. It's an ROV. It's called the Manbo. And it's apparently able to resist the intense radiation. It's about the size of a shoebox. And basically was sent down through the water. And after 3 days of carefully navigating through the shattered reactor building, the Manbo finally reached the heavily damaged Unit 3 reactor. And the robot beamed back video of a gaping hole in the bottom of the reactor. And on the floor beneath it, clumps of what looked like solidified lava, which is the first images ever taken of the plant's melted uranium fuel. It was a horrendous, horrendous disaster. Now, story coming out of Ena News is basically saying there has been a cover-up in Japan of the health effects of the Fukushima accident. And doctors are being told to just, keep the number of cancers a secret, especially the thyroid problems. And they're basically trying to tap it all down here. Japan has already said it's okay to move back into the area around the reactor. They want that land developed. They want people in there paying taxes. And if they get cancer, that's good for the economy. Then they have to go to the doctors here. All right, let's take another phone call here. W in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Just wanted to talk about net neutrality. I think this is one of those stories that's definitely getting put underneath a whole lot of junk. Basically, right now, it's one of those stories. As you probably already know, they're trying to, implement a regulation that degrades net neutrality. So it gets to the point where you have to pay more for certain websites. If my understanding is correct, and I'm just looking at an article here from Huffington Post. The name of the article today is "With Net Neutrality on the Chopping Block, Communities are taking matters into their own hands and scaring the hell out of Comcast." And basically, it's saying that communities are thinking about going the public utility route instead of allowing private companies to take over the internet in their communities, which would, halt these companies trying to stop net neutrality or trying to, prevent communities from having access to all the websites with no additional costs versus what this new regulation is going to do, which is going to put additional costs on having access to certain websites.
Not exactly. Not exactly. The idea would be that if you wanted people to have access to your website, and you were put in the slow lane, you could be moved to the fast lane for a fee. You would have to pay to basically have your server more accessible. But, you've hit on something that is becoming a phenomenon across the country, and that is communities and cities setting up their own internets. There is no technological reason why you can't set up your own internet throughout your neighborhood, throughout your community, throughout your entire city. In fact, when I was back in San Francisco working on the day after tomorrow, I was made aware of this project where these people had gotten together and they were setting up a Wi-Fi network that literally reached across the city, and it was there so that children in families who couldn't afford broadband access could still use their computers for their schoolwork. And it was these little housings made out of PVC pipe that had Wi-Fi repeaters in them, and it was working really, really well. There is no rule that says only large corporations can run an internet. Ultimately, though, you're going to have to deal with the backbone carriers and whether or not they're going to be allowed to prioritize traffic on their systems.
And it's funny you just said that. It says, it's quick paragraph real quick. It says, not everyone was excited. Industry groups spent more than $450,000 campaigning against the measure. In fact, the very reason Colorado towns had to vote yes before even exploring public broadband is because of an industry-backed state law requiring municipalities to jump through hoops to take control of their internet infrastructure. The industry has successfully pushed similar legislation in over 20 states. So as you can see, there's already been
all right, so it's now illegal for you to set up your own internet, I guess. All right, well, listen, W, we got to let you go. We're coming up on another commercial break, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, apparently, there is a big problem up on Lake Michigan where U.S. Steel 6 months ago dumped a plume of toxic metal into a tributary of Lake Michigan. And apparently they've had another spill at the same Northwest Indiana plant. And they asked state environmental regulators to keep it secret, according to newly released documents. And the toxic material was chromium. And so here we have a large corporation dumping these toxic chemicals into the water and then turning around to the government and saying, yeah, you got to keep this secret. And given that we didn't see this on the corporate media, I think the government went along with it. And it raises the possibility, what other environmental damage has been done you are not aware of, possibly near your home? Because corporations like to cover that stuff up. Remember that Aaron Brockovich, Pacific Gas and Electric, had this hexavalent form of chromium, highly toxic, was leaching out from their storage pools that weren't properly constructed, and they hid it for years. Now, down in Madagascar, there's a lot of concern about this outbreak of the Black Plague. Apparently, parents rushed to schools to collect their children after rumors started that students were going to be forced into having anti-plague vaccinations. And so here's where the abuse of vaccines comes back to haunt them. The parents don't want the needles. Apparently, patients are leaving the hospitals out of concern that they're actually going to get sicker there. And one of the reasons is because the plague is now spreading to the health workers, raising the possibility that Madagascar can't contain the Black Death, and even worse, that it may have gone airborne. And that would be really, really nasty. Now, the Black Plague that we read about in the history of Europe in the Middle Ages was not airborne. It was carried directly from person to person by fleas. If it's airborne, then it will spread like a cold. Now, the FDA has approved a new digital sensor to ensure patients with mental health issues are taking the medications they're told to take. And basically, inside the medication, there's a little tiny chip that will send out a signal that is picked up by a patch you wear on some part of your body, which then in turn transmits a signal to an application run on your smartphone. And the idea being that if you're not taking your medications on time, an alert will be sounded and some guys in white coats will show up at your home to shove the pill down your throat. It does seem to be another form of medical big brotherism, where you're no longer going to have the right to refuse the medications the government wants to give you. It's right out of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Another article coming out of Zero Hedge. Scientists shocked as fisheries collapse on West Coast. It's the worst we've seen. And the Gulf of Alaska cod populations appear to be taking a nosedive. And scientists are shocked at the collapse and starving fish, making this the worst they've ever seen. Now, there are factors like overfishing. There are pollutants getting into the ocean, plastics They've sampled life forms thousands of feet down in the ocean, and they've got bits of plastic in their stomach. There are pharmaceuticals pouring into the oceans from the sewer systems, and now they're acknowledging that the radioactive contamination from Fukushima is worse than originally estimated. The powers that be have really messed up this planet. And the problem is because the cycle of life in the oceans, if you have a few key species that are dying off, it's going to have a domino effect. And these large fish may be starving because they can't find their normal food source anymore. Or maybe because of the pharmaceuticals or the pollutants or the radiation, they can't digest their food. But it's a mess. It is really, really a mess. And apparently, the U.S. government is gearing up to slaughter 90,000 wild horses. And apparently this is at the behest of the livestock lobby, who want their range kept clean of wild animals so that they can have their commercial animals do much better. And so the question of what to do with wild horses on land controlled by the Bureau of Land Management has been the subject of debate for some time. Now, remember when they went on into the Bundy Ranch and said, we're going to take control of your ranch because your cattle are endangering the desert turtle. And now they're going to turn around and just haul off and kill 90,000 horses because they're in the way of the commercial ranches. Now, if you like apples, and it's kind of hard to imagine somebody who doesn't, there is a new apple hitting store shelves, the Arctic apple. And they are genetically engineered not to brown on their way to supermarkets. And apparently these apples, made by Okanagan Specialty Fruits, are altered to not turn brown when exposed to the air. I have absolutely no intention of ever eating one of those. Because again, this GMO technology has been just rushed to the marketplace without a full, careful consideration of its long-term consequences. And we know that genetically engineering a crop can produce unanticipated side effects, which often don't show up until the product is out there being used. I'm still concerned about that epicite gene having gotten into the wild. Now, Britain is going to back a full ban on pesticides known to kill the honeybees, and that probably will help a little bit with colony collapse disorder. But again, I think the culprit may be the pollen from GMO plants, because colony collapse disorder began at the same time GMO plants started going into widespread use. And there had been an article in Nature magazine about that time showing that pollen from GMO plants were harmful to benign insect species. Now, the article specifically talked about the monarch butterfly, which has suffered a serious decline in population over the years. They're starting to come back, at least here in Hawaii. But again, looking at what's going on with these toxic spills, and the companies say to the regulators, please don't tell anybody. Does anybody think for a moment that if Monsanto found out their pollen from GMO plants was the cause of colony collapse disorder, do you think they'd stand up and say, yeah, we're guilty. It's our fault. We're our problem. No, they're going to find something else to blame. Remember when colony collapse disorder first started, they blamed microwave towers. Except that microwave towers have been around for a very, very long time. Then they blamed mites, and then they blamed the pesticides. And I'm sure the pesticides are contributing to the problem. But this genetic engineering is the most dangerous technology humans have ever played with. Because we're tinkering with the very code of life itself, where simple mistakes can have devastating consequences. A lot of people, when we talk about life on other worlds and alien civilizations, and they're saying, well, why haven't they shown up here yet? And one explanation is we may just not be worth the trouble. What do we have to interest them? When you're driving down the highway, do you stop at every anthill you pass? But there may be another explanation, and that may be that all intelligent life forms have a finite life expectancy, because eventually their technology reaches the point where they start editing the code of their life, and they make a mistake, and they drive themselves into extinction. Like I said, I'm concerned about this epicite gene. It's a GMO corn where if you eat it, you are unable to reproduce. And like most other GMO products, it was test grown in open fields. We don't know where that pollen has gone. We do know that in the decline of birth rates here in the United States of America is focused primarily on the Hispanic population, who are the highest per capita consumers of corn products. Now, over in Mexico, the Popocatépetl volcano has violently erupted, and authorities are warning a bigger eruption could threaten more than 20 million people in Mexico City. The Ring of Fire has really been rocking and rolling. We've had a couple of big quakes over in New Caledonia. Just had another one between Fiji and Samoa. Big quakes. And it almost feels like something is adjusting inside the world. Now, apparently, Russian Culture Minister Vladimir Medinsky has described a decision by a Dutch court not to return a collection of Scythian gold to Crimea as a most dangerous precedent and threatened to sever all museum ties with the Netherlands. Here's the story. Back when Crimea was still kind of attached to Ukraine, this museum in the Netherlands borrowed this collection of Scythian gold artifacts, about 500 of them, that were borrowed from Crimean collections. And museums do that a lot. You will see these touring exhibits of things that are borrowed from other museums around the world. But with Crimea having left Ukraine and merged with the Russian republics, the Netherlands just decided, we're not going to return it. We're just going to hang on to it. And they got a Dutch court to go along with it. And Russia is saying this is similar to Nazi looting of other people's treasures. And they're very angry about it, as well they should be. Apparently, boy, this situation with the sexual allegations, I think somebody needs to slow this down a little bit. Because apparently, TV host Charlie Rose is now the subject of allegations by 8 women who ranged in age from 21 to 37 at the time of the alleged encounters. And they were employees or wanted to work for Rose at the Charlie Rose show from the late 1990s to as recently as 2011. And CBS has now suspended Charlie Rose. I think it would have been prudent for them to wait for some confirmation because, frankly, there are too many of these happening for them all to be accurate. And we know the allegations against Judge Roy Moore were a fabrication, just like that yearbook signature. So it has to slow down. It is turning into a witch hunt. And it's directed, obviously, at men. And I remember back in the 1990s when the militant feminists were out there saying, sure, you know, say the guy raped you or assaulted you or abused you. That's empowerment. And I'm very, very concerned we seem to be going back into the same thing. Along, of course, with the observation that the corporate media's obsession with these allegations is distracting from the escalation of the wars, from Dossier Gate, from Uranium Gate, from Primary Gate. These are things that affect all of our lives. Apparently, another accuser against Sylvester Stallone has come forward. All right, let's take a phone call. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I got a question. But first of all, you know, looking back on it, when I was a teenager and whatnot, you know, I guess I was raped a number of times by girls. You know, I mean, I was always trying to be the gentleman and, you know, not trying to, you know, get anherwhere on the first or second date. And these women were all over me, ripping my pants off.
My heart bleeds for you.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you know, all sex is rape. You know, based on that, I guess they were raping.
Yeah.
You know, the board op told me you'd already covered this, but I really have, my more important question is who is putting this stuff out? Because I heard some of it. There's a woman's voice that I've never heard before. I don't know who she is, but this rumor that's being put out, outlandish, rumor about the Marine Expeditionary Unit basically is secured the Langley. CIA.
That seems to be a hoax. That story's a hoax.
I'm really interested in knowing who these people are and this network of people that are putting that out. And I understand, too, that it seems to me, I could be wrong, but it seemed like Robert David Steele is one of the people putting this out. I wonder if that's true.
Well,
he's the guy that told Alex Jones that they're running pedophile rings on Mars.
Okay. Basically, over the last several months, there have literally been dozens and dozens of newly created news sites which are out there putting out hoax stories in the hope that the independent media will pick them up and run them so that they can later be discredited.
Right.
Because obviously the government and the corporate media cannot rebuild their credibility anytime soon. All they can do is try and level the playing field by attacking and destroying our credibility, and that's where a lot of this nonsense stuff is coming from.
It could be professionals, because one of the lectures sounded very slick and professionally. It sounded very professionally produced, and I'm like, who is this person? How come I've never heard of them?
Yeah, they are professionals.
Up on people's YouTubes. They're popping up. The person that I first heard about it from, she's on YouTube and everything, and it popped up on her YouTube unsolicited, which I guess isn't out of the norm, but. She didn't go looking for it. It popped up, so I just find that very convenient.
Well, if it's popping up there, then that's something YouTube is doing to try and get that story on out there. But again, there's zero confirmation from it, and I've seen it being run banner on many of these obvious hoax fraud sites here. Hal Turner's been pushing this on his radio show, and Hal Turner was outed some years ago as a FBI intelligence asset. And hackers got into his email. They got the emails of him talking to his FBI handler, and he was forced to come on out and admit that, yes, he was working for the FBI, and presumably he still is.
Well, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. I was getting ready to go to my recruiting office, see if they can take me back. But,
yeah, no, right now, official Washington, D.C., especially the narcocracy, they're in a panic. They're nearing the edge of hysteria over the fact that people just aren't buying the bovine excrement anymore. And they have gotten what they wanted with lies and fraud and deception for so long, they don't know any other way to go about their business. They've forgotten how to actually run a country as a country rather than as a scam for their own enrichment and glorification. So they're really in a bit of a panic. They're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Hillary is out there making these threats that if she's charged for any of her crimes, terrible things will happen, meaning she'll spill the beans on a lot of really nasty stuff. That could bring the entire federal government down. And I think it's only a matter of time before that happens anyway. So, Frank, we're going to let you go. We've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, last segment of our program today. And we've got a little bit of good news for all of you. RBN host Tom Lacovara has been released from federal prison after almost 1 year, and he's going to be joining John Stedmiller right after my show ends, which is just in about 5 minutes here. So you're going to want to stay tuned and hear it, because Tom will be on with John to basically update everyone about his ordeal, which is related to the Malheur occupation and the Bundy Ranch trials. And we know that in the case of the Malheur occupation, that is tied into the Uranium One scandal, because the uranium that the Canadian company wanted was underneath that ground that they were trying to seize. Didn't want to pay fair market price for the mineral rights, just said, we're going to shoo all these people off. And so that's a degree of just how corrupt our government has become. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that show here. Tom Lacovara is going to be on with John Stedmiller. That's definitely, do not miss that one. Now then, interestingly enough, Harvard Experiment did a study about exposure in the news media, which sort of contradicts the conventional wisdom that large media outlets command more attention. And what the Harvard study found out was that even small publishers have a large effect on the national discourse. And this was an article published in Science on the Effects of News. And it says, exposure to the news media causes Americans to take public stands on specific issues, join national policy conversations, and express themselves publicly. And the research aims to quantify the effect of news media. And basically said that the art of publishing news is still surprising in many ways. And what this basically means is the independent media still has, we have an impact. We may have a larger impact than most people would assume. And that's really a very good thing. And finally, last story today here. As Bitcoin is soaring to ever higher heights, a lot of people are talking about Bitcoin for wealth preservation. Earlier in the show, we talked about how the Bitcoin enthusiasts have conceded it will never really be the basis of a national payment system, but they're saying hang on to it because it's virtual gold. And unfortunately, as I said before, I'm smelling tulips in the air here. When it comes to the gold versus Bitcoin debate, there's something you need to keep in mind. Gold is physical, it is tangible, it is in your hand, under your control. Bitcoin is an imaginary construct. And so there's no question. If all the computers go down, Bitcoin vanishes. The gold will still be there. And I shudder to think that somebody may be trying to hype the Bitcoin to get people to sell their gold, because we know the private central banks are trying to grab that. The Fed in New York is trying to get more gold. No, you keep your hands on that gold. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here, and I got to do the Jim Goddard show. So we'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. You're going to love the show. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.